co-executive director of Third Horizon, a filmmaking collective in Miami. And we staged the annual Third Horizon Film Festival, which celebrates the cinema of the Caribbean, its diaspora, and the global South. We're really quite thrilled to be hosting Sundance Film Festival's satellite events in Miami, along with our longtime friends and co-conspirators, O Cinema, one of Miami's most beloved art house cinemas, with a core commitment to highlighting films that are reflective of Miami's diverse communities. I hope you're doing well. I know that feels like a trite thing to say these days, but in a moment where, so much of our health and well-being is under threat, we're honored that you're making time to join us tonight. And we hope that the conversation that we have that follows is as enriching as you'd hope it would be and is worth your time. We certainly intend to make it so. So while this is technically a Miami event, I'm actually broadcasting to you from Barbados, where I've been the past few months. It's where I'm from. Been working on a script and just thinking about a lot of things, And in preparing for this evening, I had an interesting memory. I'm actually at my childhood home right now. And it was here that I first fell in love with movies. There was a little video store around the corner. It was actually a shipping container that the owner, a very enterprising person, put some lights inside and some shelving, and the videotapes were all bootleg. I was supposed to grab one to show you, but yeah, it was all we had access to, right? It wasn't like Blockbuster where you would go in and you would see the official cover and whatnot. No, this was a tape that somebody flew to Miami, stayed at a hotel for a weekend, went to a flea market, whatnot, maybe bought some bootlegs, or recorded some films off of HBO, came back to Barbados, put them in the video store and rented them. Yeah, that was what, late 80s, early 90s. It's funny, I bring this up because I remember around that time, it would have been 1992 actually. I remember sitting here in this house, in this living room. I don't know if you can see that TV right there. It's not the same TV, but I remember sitting in that living room and watching Showbiz Tonight on CNN, which was their nightly entertainment show. At the time, we only had 3 television stations. We just received cable. We had Lifetime, ESPN, and CNN. And so anyway, I used to watch Showbiz Tonight pretty often. I was a movie fan, right? And I remember it would have been 1992 was when I first discovered Sundance, actually, because I distinctly remember watching an episode that was covering the premiere of Quentin Tarantino's Reservoir Dogs. And I remember just seeing that segment. It raised all these questions in me. It left me so curious about, well, what other types of films were out there? Because up until that point, we really only had, or at least I did, only had access to the Hollywood blockbusters that you would see at the drive-in or the cinema here. And Kung Fu movies, we had a lot of Kung Fu movies too. But the world of independent cinema was not one that I was intimately familiar with. And I remember seeing Sundance on that segment and being so curious that I couldn't satiate until years later, when I started to travel and had access to, specialty video stores and cable and all of these things. I tell these stories to highlight a few things that will come up in our conversation tonight, as it relates to Caribbean filmmakers and film. Access, distance, education, distribution, the very definition of what it means to be successful as a filmmaker. These are things that are discussed by filmmakers everywhere, but have a particularly fraught resonance for filmmakers from the Caribbean, and film lovers as well. Things that we must discuss as we pilot ourselves in building our film industries across these countries, supporting each other, other filmmakers, and potentially reconfiguring our relationship to the global cinema community. So we can't discuss that all this evening. That's something that is best, an ongoing conversation that happens at Third Horizon Film Festival and countless other Caribbean film festivals too. There are many others, Trinidad and Tobago Film Festival, Haruna and St. Vincent, Caribbean Tales in Toronto, Haiti International Film Festival in LA. There's so many, and we're beginning to see this conversation intensify. So anyway, I hope that we can get into some of that tonight. that those of you who are curious about Caribbean cinema may not know much about it before, use this as an entry point to dive deeper. And so we'll be talking with 3 filmmakers who we think exemplify some of the most exciting, work happening in the region, and who are, really have worked through and are working through a lot of what we're faced with, the challenges and the opportunities. So I'm going to read their bios. We're going to play some clips of their work, and then we're going to bring them to the screen and get into this conversation. So first up is Maya Cozier, who was raised by artist parents Irene Shaw and Christopher Cozier in Trinidad and Tobago. She worked as a dancer and choreographer for music videos and television shows before transitioning into directing. Her short films have been shown at film festivals internationally. She's currently pursuing an MFA at Columbia University. Her feature debut, She Paradise, world premiered at AFI Fest last fall. Next up is Nelson Carlo de los Santos Arias. He studied cinematography at the University of Cinema in Buenos Aires, continued study at Edinburgh College of Arts, and received his MFA in film and video at Cal Arts. His most recent feature, Cocote, world premiered at Locarno Film Festival, where it won the Golden Leopard in the Signs of Life category. His upcoming film, Pepe, The Imagination of Third Cinema, was granted the Hubert Ball Script Development Fund of the Rotterdam International Film Festival, and recently the World Cinema Fund and ACP from Berlin. Guetty Felin was born in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, and grew up in New York. She has an MFA in cinema from the University of Paris. Her films include the documentaries Closer to the Dream and Broken Stones. And her narrative feature debut, Ayiti Mon Amour, world premiered at Toronto International Film Festival and was Haiti's first official entry for consideration for the best foreign language film at the Academy Awards. She's the founder of Bell Moon Productions, the filmmaking collective Daughters of Tressie, and the film festival, I'm gonna botch this pronunciation, but Les Lumières Dessous, Rencontre cinématographique de Jacques Mel. So I'm gonna kick it to our tech guru, Yafit. He doesn't like when I call him by name, but Yafit, if you could run those clips, and let's get into this conversation.
Auditions for Soca backup dancer.
Let me see. It's tonight?
Mm-hmm.
You should go.
Yeah, let's go. Can I help you? Why so shy? Huh? What's your name?
Sparkle.
Where you from?
Up the road.
You like my chain?
Yeah, nice.
So tell me, Sparkle from up the road, how does a girl with a wardrobe of a 12-year-old have such good taste in jewelry?
Please tell me you have better clothes than this.
You can dance?
Since I was a child. She's still a child.
How old are you?
17. You should come and audition.
Hey, it costs $10 a print. You can't be giving us out to everybody. It's tonight at 8. You should come.
Really? You have a good look. Eat.
Bukuga madao sama katakoro. Moshio doichi zuto okiteru koto ga dekireba. Kotori tachi no asa ichiban no uta o kiki, tugi ya taiyo ni naru no o mitodoke nagara, boku ga yoru o asa ni kaeru tedudai ga dekuru no ni to shinjite ita.
Changing tide, river rise, the water's high. Leave it all behind. Let let it flow by.
J'ai même pas de glaçon.
The flood
Kawai
can
sona
wash
Parlez là,
away
moutonnière.
roots that grow for you.
Kote nan moun yo.
Won't blind
Ton seul
me
femme,
from the truth I can't
peut-être que moi
see.
dire comme ça, à faire ça pas intéressé. Qui ça vous voulez pour mal faire l'autre boss sans roder ça?
The river will flow, release these waters to the sea. Time will tell and wash your river over me.
En cuanto a lo abierto, el mundo, y al mundo, el universo, que es él mismo abierto. Allí donde algo vive, hay, abierto en alguna parte, un registro en el que el tiempo se inscribe, y el tiempo, al fin y al cabo, es lo que siempre nos va a importar.
Well, please join me in welcoming to your screens Maya Cozier, Guetty Felin, and Nelson Carlo de los Santos Arias. Hey, everybody. How you doing? Hi. Where's everybody tuning in from? You know, I can't keep up with y'all Caribbean folks. Where is everybody right now?
I'm very close to you in Trinidad.
You're in Trinidad. Nelson, where are you right now?
Santo Domingo.
Santo Domingo. And Guetty?
Los Angeles.
Los Angeles.
Hello, everyone.
Pardon?
I said hello, everyone.
Hello.
Yeah, it's really, first, thank you all so much for joining us. This came together really quickly, and I'm really excited to, one, about you all. I'm a fan, first and foremost. But, it's always great to talk to you all. So Maya, let's start with you. I'm gonna talk with each of you individually, and then we're gonna broaden the conversation a bit. So Maya, She Paradise had its world premiere just a few months ago, and is still, making its way through the festival circuit. It's a film that Trinidad really breathes through this film. It's really alive. Can you share a bit about your filmmaking journey up until this point? And this film, She Paradise, was, originally, for the audience, was originally a short film. So Maya, I was curious, what was it about this particular story that, that led you to stick with it through development of a short film into the eventual feature?
Yeah, I did my undergraduate in film at the School of Visual Arts, which is a small art school in New York. And as soon as I graduated, I returned home to Trinidad. And I've been living here for the past 4 years. But as soon as I returned home, I really wanted to tell a story that felt like my experiences growing up in Trinidad. And so I spent most of my teenage years working as a dancer, a choreographer. I used to model carnival costumes, from the age of 15. And so those were really years where I came of age in Trinidad, and I I would say those were the formative years of my life where I discovered who I was. I found my voice, and I sort of found who I identify as a young Caribbean woman. And so the story felt very personal to me. And I also wanted to tell a story about a young Black Caribbean woman finding her identity within the entertainment landscape. So it was something that felt very personal. And I started off by shooting a short film that eventually evolved into a feature-length film.
Nice, nice. Well, Guetty, taking it to you, Ayiti Mon Amour, which, I'm always proud and happy to say was the first film we ever showed at Third Horizon back in 2016. So it was, thank you for providing us with an auspicious start to our festival. But, it's won great critical praise, was, Haiti's first entry for consideration to the Academy Awards. But, as I touched on a bit in your bio, you've directed documentaries. I see you're working on a VR project. You've recently founded a film festival, a filmmaking collective. And, you also help produce projects for others. What accounts for this range, for this versatility, for this, doing so much, it's, you wear many hats, many hats.
The bandwidth that's been afforded to me through empty nesting. So I have grown kids now who have left the nest. So I have a lot of time in my hands. But seriously, I consider myself a cineast, which for me is all about fabricating experiences of cinema, whether I'm directing myself or I'm producing other people's works or I'm showcasing the works of other filmmakers that I admire and love of all generation. And so the collective really, I mean, when the pandemic hit, I was in the midst of pre-pro of my upcoming feature, and all of a sudden find myself with a lot of time on my hands, and I started to dissect our film industry here in America and this unjust ecosystem that doesn't showcase our work or give us the opportunity to express ourselves fully, and do not give us the finances to actually make the works that we want to direct. And I started to dissect it, and then I wrote this kind of like long j'accuse letter, and had a couple of trusting people read it, and I was going to publish it. And then I had second thoughts about it, and I was saying to myself, we can't keep trying to get Hollywood to listen to us and to love us and to like us and to accept us. And if we are to do anything, if this pandemic is affording us any kind of time, it is time to think about like the old ways and how do we interject ourselves in a new paradigm. And so the collective came about that, came from that, was born out of that, of creating spaces for us to herald each other's work, celebrate, promote each other's work, and specifically female filmmakers of color who go erased, after their first film, and it's difficult to make the second film and you never hear of them. And Tressie Souders was the first African-American woman, the first woman of color to direct a movie in 1926. And we don't even have the film of Tressie Souders. We know that the film existed, but it has gone missing. And she moved to Los Angeles in hopes of making a career, and it never happened. And it behooves me as a filmmaker, woman filmmaker, to continue to support the works of female filmmakers. So we don't have Tressie Souders, that people can make their second film and their third films. And so that's how this collective came about. In terms of the VR project, I actually don't like VR, honestly. And actually, the first time I saw something on VR, I almost threw up because this kind of closeness of being in people's misfortunes and misery made me uncomfortable. And it was about the Kenyan cholera epidemic, and I'm sure that it was non-Black people who directed it. But it made me uncomfortable at the same time, because once again, you know, like our bodies were there on display for people to do whatever they feel, and and I started to say to myself, you know, like, why did I feel so uncomfortable about this? And in thinking about this documentary that I'm working on, I decided to incorporate VR because I felt that it was the best way for me to tell this story of a place that was personal and intimate. And I'm using dance as well to tell the story. And so it worked for that. So I always believe that it's the subject that dictates the medium and the form that we take. And I don't like to be pigeonholed in anything. I make documentaries, I make also fiction, and I play with form as well. I play with hybrid forms of filmmaking, and yeah, and it's also it was a way for me to make peace with this new technology as well, and also to give myself a sense of like feeling modern, and so yeah. But thank you for doing this. This is wonderful. I'm really happy to be here amongst these two colleagues.
Well, thank you for joining. Always a pleasure to talk. So Nelson, next to you. I personally, you know, first discovered your work through Cocote a few years ago, and have since gone and explored, you know, the rest of your body of work, and it, you know, it's rooted in such a strong. You have such a strong experimental practice, and one of the things that one of the things that I thought about is that, you know, I can still see traces of that in Cocote, and we've talked a bit about your next project. I wonder if you see any relationship between your experiments in sound and language, and if you see any dynamic between that and, say, the social history and the political history and just the reality of the Caribbean, which is this collision of cultures and, you know, at times beholden to the imperial norms that formed it, or other times rebuking those colonial norms. Yeah.
Okay. I'm okay there? So wait, like, tell me again, like what was the question? Because it was a little bit long.
Yeah.
So
No, I was wondering how your practice, you have an experimental practice, you know, you have a practice which is rooted in a lot of, you know, experimental forms. And I'm wondering if there's a relationship between that and the social reality of the Caribbean, the history of the Caribbean, this clash of cultures and language, and, you know.
Of course, yes. Well, first of all, like, yes, I think like experimenting, we should simplify the word, because it's just like put it in the action, just to experiment with something. Then to produce all the type of aesthetic, it has a political context. So one hand, experimental films, most of the time where people were like experimental with the form. And I think somehow this is how I began, right? But what was interesting about experimental film scenario, especially in Latin America, which I guess all cinema is experimental for the big people from the north, no? That they are the one who establish what is like narrative accepted, right? Like if there is no other ways or forms of telling stories, right? So then it becomes a political statement with that. And yes, that will have different you could say different aspects of the search of an idea, right? One could be cultural, one could be political, one could be specifically formally, just forms. I believe that cinema, and I agree with Alan Badiou. He says that cinema is the art of heterogeneity, and what it does is that it's constantly creating relationship synthesis where there is no relation to elements. So I believe that cinema itself, it's already a very heterogenic form of art, which is a form of communication and which is a form of business too, because it is all that. So this heterogeneity most of the time gets killed in this homogenization that Western have done with the rest of the world, but also in the homogenization of how especially from Anglo-Saxon countries, like what is it like? What is the story based on an Aristotelian structure? And in the case of the United States, right, like the Shakespearean way of introduction of characters, right? So everything turns around this, which is boring in the case. Like if we don't want to get into politics, let me tell you, just boring. I don't want to do that film. I don't want to do it. And on the other hand, this experimentation, it is experimentation because you need to decolonize yourself from, come on, I'm as much as I can. One, I can never pass my cultural context, right? So my cultural context is that I'm coming from a very complicated island that is divided, but then it is highly Americanized by having one side having the biggest occupation by the United States in Latin America, and the other hand, the country Haiti, where is the most occupied, so it's impregnated in our way of Americanization. It's part of now our collective identity. So if we actually are fighting for diversity and heterogeneity, we need to actually fight in the production of subjectivity. And by doing this film, when people say, well, why do you like, you want to do these films, you just want to be, no. I want to bring, it's not about national cinema. It's not about creating the cinema from the Dominican Republic. It's actually doing something in favor of heterogeneity. So if we believe in heterogeneity, we have to produce, and we have to have platforms to produce new forms of, or allow new forms of subjectivities, and then there's a lot of filters. Film festivals are filters, the industry, the industries are other filters, film schools are other filters, no? So we, it's a fight, no? It's a fight of production of knowledge somehow.
Yeah. So I want to take that question and broaden it up to everybody else here. The term you mentioned, decolonization, it's a term which, certainly we've been hearing more and more of, very popular and very common in the visual art spaces, increasingly so in the world of cinema. Is it something that you all think about? And I get, we're very intimate with colonialism in the Caribbean. Our islands have been colonized were colonized by many different powers. And I just wonder how much do you think about this, and how much do you think about your work as, subverting or running counter to, the established norms of the industry? And, or I guess our simpler way of asking that is there any way that you're going about your career in a different way that anchors power in you and your community away from the concentrated sources of power and industry? It's a big question, but Guetty, Maya, either of you care to
I actually think it's distracting. I think we're all collateral damage of colonization, right? Coming from the islands. And so they just have to deal with us. I don't think they were expecting this. And so, you know, that's their experiment, right? And they have to deal with it. And oddly enough, I think the folks who do need to decolonize are the colonizers themselves. The folks who need to take down institutionalized racism are the racists themselves. And so I don't I don't get distracted by it. You know, Toni Morrison speaks of like racism being a distracting factor to us as artists to continue to create. And it gets in the way because of every time that you're about to create something and you're thinking about it in with the barometers of those who are supposed to be those filters that Nelson is talking about. If you're creating with those filters, then you're not free to create. I think about sovereignty in my creation. I think about like my own independence gaze. I think about my characters and how do they move through the world. I think about giving them agency. I don't think about decolonizing anybody else's gaze in my work. It starts from inward and then it goes, you know, and then it goes outward to the audience. But it's from a space of where I am with what I'm bringing to the table that has like nothing to do with what the other people's like value system. So I don't think about it that way. And I don't think also that the young people of the generation of my children are thinking about it that way. There is a sense of like, they belong here. There's an entitlement. I mean, you know, you all saw the inauguration and the highlight of the event was Amanda Gorman. I mean, she delivered her poetry like, this is my space. I belong here. I belong in this America. I belong in this. And this America would not be this America, the beautiful, America, the just and the righteous without someone like Amanda Gorman. And for her to stand up there and feel that entitlement, I'm looking at her, I'm saying, she's not operating from a place of like decolonizing anything. She's operating from a space of like confidence, of belonging, of being part of like this new dream that she speaks of. And I think it's up to us to re-identify, shift the narrative, shift the gaze, but amongst us, speak to us, and not necessarily trying to create things to make us valid and of value to them. But are we of value to each other in the islands, in the Caribbean? What are we saying? What is the conversation that we're having amongst each other? That's what I'm much more interested in that than decolonizing, you know. Yeah, that's where I'm at in my career.
Yeah, Maya, I wanted to ask you what Guetty just raised there of thinking about who views your film and how much do you wrestle with these things in your you know, it.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of young filmmakers, even if we're not, especially in the Caribbean, even if we're not actively thinking about decolonization, I think the power that we get is from telling stories that we feel no one would even care about. And I think there's so much power in being passionate about a story, setting out to tell it, and not necessarily feeling confined or creatively restricted by what you think might cross over or be appealing to an outsider. And so a lot of us, we're just sort of subconsciously on the ground telling things that are meaningful to us. And I think there's a lot of power in that. I'm also, interestingly enough, like I'm working on a short film about the Cambule riots in the late 1880s in Trinidad. And I'm working with Antu Springer and Attila about that story. And I remember in conversation about these riots, because basically there were British laws that banned the Cambule, and the stick fighters combated that, which eventually allowed them to celebrate freely, and that evolved into Carnival. But in talking to her about filming this, she mentioned that at some point, the stick fighters, even though it's a reenactment, at some point the stick fighters actually do manifest on set. And that conversation with her, like as a Caribbean team, telling our own story, I just remember thinking about how many stories I've heard of outsiders or foreigners coming into a space and being told, can you not film during this moment, and hiding the recording or pretending that they're not filming even though they actually are. So I think little things like that, I think shifting, like making sure that the gap between the story and the storyteller is not a huge one. And I think diminishing that gap and making sure that Caribbean people are telling their stories, and that these stories aren't just, as Guetty said, it's not about us, it's about the colonizer, that they're not just coming to these stories in an extractive way, and exoticizing it and just taking what they can from it and running, but that people who are a part of these cultures and care about these stories actually are able to tell them themselves.
You know, it's funny, you know, every time, you know, you have a list here of questions and you tell yourself, all right, we're going to get through all these questions, and the time just flies. I would like to open it up to the audience in about 5 minutes. But I'd like to ask each of you 2 more questions. You know, thinking on this, you know, one of the things that occurred to me while I was, you know, putting together these questions and thinking about all of your work, it occurred to me, I was like, man, all of us have been educated elsewhere, right? All of us have, you know, and that's not to cast judgment on us or, you know, are the spaces we come from, but what do you think needs to happen to encourage more work from our lens, from our perspective, rooted in who we are, in our explorations of ourselves? What has to happen, you know? Now, I mean, there's some obvious answers, you know, there's funding, this historically hasn't been a lot of funding opportunities in the Caribbean. There are, you know, more and more every day, it feels like. I know in Jamaica, JAFTA, you know, funds short films. In Trinidad, film TT has, you know, there's been a history of tax incentives and whatnot, and we're seeing more and more collectives springing up. Well, yeah, what do you think needs to happen to basically create more filmmakers such as yourselves? You know, I think about, I told this story earlier of me leaving here. It took me so long to get behind the camera, to be able to tell the stories that I wanted to tell, because it felt as if the obstacles, both here in Barbados and abroad, were so huge. What do we have to do to get past that point, so that we can see more honest and true Caribbean films emerging, you know? And any of you, you know, feel free to take it on as you'd like.
You know, I'm, you know, my native country has a plethora of structural challenges, and the arts and cinema are like not even on the list of those challenges. So it is not a country that is very friendly or favorable to the artists and filmmakers in general, and which dates back, you know, like from like the dictatorship and when you had a totalitarian state. I mean, they were afraid of writers, they were afraid of, like, you know, painters and so on and so forth. So that tradition and that kind of fear of the artist is still there, ingrained in that culture. But at the same time, I think, you know, cinema is a very democratic art form, but it is also very elitist, in the sense that the people who are making it always been, you know, people who have like the means. And in Haiti today, specifically, you know, there are some budding filmmakers. There's a film school, and but it still also, you know, comes down to, like, you know, finances and the means. But at the same time, there's a lot of us in the generation before them who are reaching out to them. I joke that I am the biggest employer of the filmmakers, the budding filmmakers in Haiti. They were always working, either they're working on my films or they're working on films that, you know, I'm producing. I hire them for the festival. And I believe that it is up to us. It behooves us as folks who have been schooled elsewhere to go back. Not everyone can, can do that, but to find time, to make time to go back. I mean, the country has given a lot to me, so it's only normal that for me, it's part of my duty and responsibility to go back and continue to mentor, continue to find spaces to for that generation to express themselves. And I think the more we do it, the more it becomes normalized. Right now it's seen as something like, it's just artists that are like tripping and kind of thing, like they're making, films or whatever. But I think we can normalize it. Those of us who have the means and who have been fortunate to have made our films within the country or outside the country can reach back. And we are doing it. I mean, I work with a community of filmmakers locally. Just recently, I was doing a documentary workshop with Laurence Magloire, who has a foundation there. And she moved back. She was schooled and trained in Canada and moved back over 2 decades ago and created this foundation. So I think it's about the collective effort. And I'm constantly looking at ways of finding bridges, between Haiti and the rest of the Caribbean as well. So, and that's why I started this film festival, and not always looking to the north, but looking to the south. I mean, it's called Les Lumières du Sud, which means Southern Lights, and Lumière in the sense of the Lumière brothers and founders of, this artifact. Yeah, I'm constantly looking for ways of working collectively together with other Caribbean countries as well. So I'm just putting that out there.
Thank you. Nelson, what do you, we talked a bit, I guess a week or two ago about some of the challenges that we're faced with here. How do you think, what can we do to overcome them? Oh wait, you're muted again.
We said how we create filmmaker like us. Well, I don't know if I.
Well, I don't necessarily mean I don't.
It's a joke.
Yeah, I just mean getting your work out into the world.
I want to say that regardless who am I, let's say in a big way, okay, let's take what is good. Well, I was able to make films without actually showing following my own path, something that is very hard in Latin America, right? So okay, let's say that how can we do people? Well, we have to learn that film cannot, that we have to teach in the communities, for example, and teach that cinema could be done in other ways and not in the industrial way. That's the first thing. And the second one is to inject knowledge. People need knowledge. We need to inject knowledge to the communities, so when I we use a lot of the time the word decolonize, and decolonization actually was used by Rita Segato said that Aníbal Quijano is the most I don't know how to say that in English. Well, yeah, doesn't matter. Whatever. Aníbal Quijano was the first one who used this word, and this conception that he does, calls coloniality of power, Eurocentrism in Latin America, in the Americas. Sorry, not in Latin America, in the Americas. And one of the thesis of this project is that so we don't have to get into it, is that America, Europe, race, capitalism, and modernity was born in the same day. So this is what is interesting about this idea. Also, you can find it in Edouard Glissant, no? This notion of the idea actually of decolonize yourself is an action. So that's why they don't use, it's an action that you can, that is not only reserved to people that were ex-colony. No, in the big countries, people need to, as Guetty said, you have to restructure institutions, you have to fight for a lot of things. So this idea of decolonization, I think it's kind of the spirit so it's already impregnated in us in every time we have to work, right? But for me, it's very, very important that again, because for me, because I have to talk by my own notions, by my own history, I think like the impact that we have right now is the conservative face of the United States as empire, and that's the one that has Americanized and introduced neoliberalism and capitalism. So by that time, there are people, they own their subjectivities, right? Like for example, so this is when it gets this theoretical, super difficult. This is when it gets to down to earth. When you have politics from a government that do not need, that they don't understand like the urgency that cinema could have to talk about collectiveness or to talk about collective imaginary, collective identities, something that it's a conversation that we haven't been able to do it because we always, you know, we're westernized first, no? So in that time, for example, the notion of race in the United States cannot be in the same way. We cannot treat race in mixed countries. We have to, racism always exists, but we cannot just copy paste the discussion of race of the United States and apply it to Dominican Republic, to Haiti, to Guatemala, no, it's not, it's impossible. So to embrace this idea that there is plurality, and this plurality can also, there could be other sources of knowledge and not only Netflix. And this is, again, my problem with Netflix is that first, do not contribute with taxes for national cinema. I'm getting very technical here. But what is the problem is that you talk about funds, those funds will not exist because in the end, for example, I can pick you my local thing is that in Colombia too, right? Netflix will have a cashback, a deal at Cinema Law. They go and they have a 45% of cashback when they go. So all the cinema institution is built around these big companies and you lose the national funds. The first thing that cuts is national funds, but they will not lose the cashback because Netflix have 15. So the problem is that Netflix doesn't exist or United States, Hollywood do not exist. I'm not talking about that, but we need to decentralize information and decentralize anything, any form. So that's why my students, they read this so they can feel that they're part of the history. When you say, oh, modernity just not come from Europe. No, modernity as we know it, it was built by this dichotomy that happened at the same time with the production of a cultural identity, which was the Americas, and then Europe, because Europe didn't exist before colonization, you know? They built this idea. So at the same time, when you come in, as Fanon said, when you have the complex of it, right? And you come from a place in your own philosophers, like all readers put you in the center of the discussion, man, it feels good. And you're not just reading a French philosopher that you're always trying to match the European individual or the American individual, no? Right. And that will happen within the first world countries too.
Well, I just looked at the time. We only have 10 minutes left. I have so much more I'd like to ask you all, but how about no. Yeah, we do have to wrap in 10 minutes, sadly. The opening ceremony is at the top of the hour. But I do want to take some questions for the audience. I see a question here about distribution. What do filmmakers think of Caribbean VOD platforms is another question here. What about distribution? It's a huge problem. We make the film, but we have a huge hurdle with distribution there. More and more, you mentioned Netflix, and more online platforms. We at Third Horizon, we recently merged with Caribbean Film Academy, and we will be rebooting Studio Anansi, our VOD platform in the months to come. I know Filmco and TT just in Trinidad and Tobago just launched one. There are others which are not necessarily Caribbean, but like quality TV. How do you all think about distribution? Maya, you have a film that's on the festival circuit. It's certainly on your mind, I'm sure. So I'll go to you first, and then Nelson and Guetty. How much does distribution as a Caribbean filmmaker weigh on you?
I mean, I definitely think Caribbean people taking distribution into their own hands kind of democratizes the films that we have access to. Because similar to what you said earlier, growing up, all I had access to at a theater in Trinidad was the latest Hulk or the newest Spider-Man. And so I actually think, I mean, yes, I know there's issues around the National Film Fund and Netflix, but I actually think that the introduction of streaming has allowed people who do live in the Caribbean to access independent cinema and to access a wider range of films that we necessarily could not have accessed when we had to go to the theater and we can just pull up our laptops and stream different films. So I think there is an increase in film literacy, definitely. And I do think that having the power to distribute our own films and to consume our own content is a step in the right direction. From distribution for my film, we're still doing the festival route, so I still have to learn those lessons. We haven't gotten to the distribution yet, but I mean, it's good to see that some West Indian films are making it on to the mainstream platforms as well.
We have a couple. I'm trying to combine a few questions here. We have a few questions about the classics of Caribbean cinema and other filmmakers from the region, or filmmakers in general. Like who inspires you and who has influenced your work, and who do you all look to? Because we have quite a few filmmakers in here, many of them from the Caribbean, who have confronted the scenario that we mentioned of not having access, and that's beginning to change. Each of you, who have you looked to and who has inspired you? And mind you, that doesn't necessarily have to be a filmmaker either. It could be a writer. It could be, I told a friend of mine this story the other day of one of the most inspiring, the person who inspired me the most as a young artist was a local rapper named Big Wizard. He rapped in a Bajan accent, and that exploded my mind as to what I could do as an artist. And anything you all care to share that could be of use to the up and coming filmmakers in our audience?
I'm inspired mainly by writers. I do have filmmakers and films more that I love, and I was fortunate to be in company, in the presence of met filmmakers that I really admire and have become friends with them, and they're from different parts of the world. But I think my advice for budding filmmakers would be really to really ask yourself, how passionate are you about this? How much, what is it that you want to say to the world? How do you see the world? And how do you, and look at your community first, look within as opposed to looking outwards all the time, because I think the mistake is to try to be and emulate, Western filmmakers, emulate, Tarantino or Scorsese or whatever. And I'm always saying, look within, look at how you can find your own cinema, your own ways of expressing yourself more than anything else. Because I think, I'm not saying that don't go and watch the films of others. I think, you should. I mean, you should watch as many films as possible. But I think we have to start from where we are, grow where you were planted. And there's so much, because we tend to not give value to our own communities and our own stories. And I'm speaking from a Haitian perspective that I see with young Haitian filmmakers, is that they tend to look elsewhere when there's a plethora of stories around them, constantly. So I would say, look where you are.
We have just 5 minutes left, so Nelson, I'll go to you next.
Yes, from the Caribbean, I think when I saw Alea, the Cuban filmmaker, and Nicolásito Guillén, I don't know if you can, sorry, so yeah, it's like that, Nicolásito Guillén. And of course, my mentors from La Martinique, no? Frantz Fanon, Émile Césaire, y Edouard Glissant. From the Dodo Vicent, it's been also very important for me. I think like, yeah, you got the, you get like the avant-garde people from Brazil, which yes, but when you hear this album, I mean, it's amazing. Like it's a lecture of experimenting with folk and put it into another dimension, almost like what Lisan says. And what was the distribution? Well, you know, it's okay. It's a democracy. People should be. I don't care about the. Yes, of course. I mean, the producers. Maybe I don't know. But I will never be. I will try never be in certain. Listen, streaming. We will not win with Netflix, right? So for me, what is important? I make films with funding. I'm not making film with producers in the way that United States, you know, say that films should be. So I already, in my budget, I put salary. So what I have to do is like, because what is the problem, at least in the Dominican Republic, and I'm pretty sure also in Haiti, I don't know Trinidad and Tobago, but in the social pyramid, you say that? Pyramid, pyramid? Pyramid, yeah, in the social pyramid.
And I just want to say, Nelson, we only have 2 minutes.
So, yeah, but let me tell you, social pyramid, it's just a few people of the population. You have a lot of people that not even like constitute what is lower classes, middle classes, and high class, right? You have to, Cuba did it, Colombia did it, Brazil did it. And now that I know some international funds wants to give money I don't need tickets because I already have my salary. So that's what I encourage people. If you already are making fun and you have your salary, show the film, go to the community and talk. That's what I want to do that. I want to experiment that. That's what so I don't care about if Netflix is offering, you know, things for, but that's me. Other people will have other needs. Thank you. 2 minutes.
Cool. Maya, so you lastly, you know, who inspires you? Who has inspired you? What would you offer to other Caribbean filmmakers? And people are asking if this will be posted. Yes, we will share this with to everybody who has registered here, so you can revisit, because everybody here has shared a wealth of information. So, Maya.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think, based on the experience of shooting my first film in a guerrilla style way, I think, you know, seeing other films that were shot very economically was a huge inspiration. You know, reading the stories of Rebel Without a Film Crew and Il Mariachi and how that was made. And I think that approach, that kind of unique approach to getting a film done and sort of having the open mind and the flexibility to just kind of run with it and adapt to situations and keep going. But definitely as I got into film school and I started looking at more films by Kiarostami and films that were done in one location, you know, without all this sort of excess of big budget films that I grew up seeing, I started to realize that there was a place for someone like me from the Caribbean to tell stories. And I actually do remember being an undergrad at SVA, going to BAM and seeing Guetty's film as an undergrad. And I remember the interview she had afterwards where she spoke about having her son in the film and her husband shoot it. And I remember sitting there in the audience and thinking, okay, like, stop making excuses. And like, this is how, as Caribbean filmmakers, like, this is how we have to get it done. And so I think I drew a lot of inspiration from that, and just kind of like seeing how films are being made outside of the mainstream.
Well, yes, we are resourceful people. I like to say that, you know, everybody's worried about the apocalypse right now. We in the Caribbean are very familiar with apocalypse, where we're nations and islands that were built on the ashes of empire. We're not perfect. You know, this region is no utopia. And Lord knows we have our challenges to come. But if there's one thing we are, it's resourceful. And the more that we can draw on that in the making of our cinema, there's quite an adventure to be had. So there's so much more discussion. I would like to plug Third Horizon Film Festival that is returning June 24th to 30th, our 5th edition. Very excited about that. If you can look us up, Third Horizon, thirdhorizon.net. You can apply there if you're a filmmaker who has a film to submit. And I mentioned a bunch of other Caribbean film organizations here tonight. Please engage. The most important thing is that we continue to build community and depend on each other, look to each other to build this thing and tell each other our stories. So I'm Jason Fitzroy Jeffers from Third Horizon. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you to Sundance Film Festival. This is the opening night. Please hop over to the opening ceremony, catch some other films. We have a free screening of Caribbean films tomorrow night with the Norton Museum. If you look on in your email that you would have received for this panel, it has a link for which you can register, and we have a bunch of other panels throughout the festival. Thank you to O Cinema, our partners, and most importantly, thank you to our panelists, Maya Cozier, Nelson, Carlo, de los Santos, Arias, and Guetty Felin. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing all that you shared. And thank you, the audience, for tuning in. So
Thank you.
goodbye
Thank you,
from Barbados.
Bye-bye.
Take care, everyone.